So let's say, okay, let's move past the candidate side. Now I work at company X that's using AI in all kinds of ways that I didn't even dream a company might be using AI. What
Mhm.
are some of the things that are going on behind the scenes that people probably don't know about?
Yeah. So in hiring, we see the one-way video interviews that can be analyzed by AI. We've seen gamified assessment where you play sort of a game to understand what personality you are, and if you were, and it's usually calibrated by people in the job playing the game. So if they have like a risk, if they're all risky accountants and you hire new accountants, and if I'm a job seeker who's also likes risky behavior, I might land on the yes pile. So there's a lot of questions about like maybe I'm a maverick and playing video games, but it doesn't have to do with any real life actually that this would be used in real life in the job.
Hmm.
But there are questions about that. But what we see also at work is like we see that 8 out of the 10 largest companies in the US survey their workers. So we probably see like every keystroke recording, everything you type, everything you put into shared apps. We see sentiment analysis of like Slack messages, emails, your Zoom calls, right? All of that can generate transcripts of text that then can be analyzed, and they can look for certain signals of bullying, toxic work environments, who speaks the most, who's a bully in Zoom meetings, maybe to non-compliance, inappropriate behavior. And some tools that I looked at even said that they could find instances of self-harm in social media. So some companies also do, it's called continuous employee background checking. So just continuously look at your social media and make these inferences. We don't know a whole lot how good it is, and usually AI isn't very good yet with like sarcasm, humor, and also doesn't often know. We've seen that with social media scans on folks who have applied for a role, because that then becomes lawfully they can actually get access to the data on them because it's like an official background. It's part of an official background check, and you can ask the employer or the potential employer for the data. And some people have done that, and when they looked at it, they found out that like maybe they liked a tweet that mentioned alcohol, and that was suddenly a red flag, like alcohol bad.
Right.
Or they cited I don't know, a lyric of a song, and that was then interpreted as somebody who might be suicidal or prone to self-harm, when we don't actually know that. But the problem is like these signals may be coming up, and we see companies use like sort of very vast broad AI recording and checking tools because they see employees as potential leakers, as a threat to their business. So we only have seen the very, very beginning of that.
Well, okay, so gosh, where you kind of alluded to it without saying it, but like on the continuous background check thing, right? Background checks are covered by the Fair Credit Reporting Act, which is what
Exactly.
requires the transparency. But it seems like you talked earlier about kind of regulation and some kind of oversight of all this stuff. It seems like a Fair Information Reporting Act, right? Would
Yeah.
be appropriate. Like look, I get if you suspect somebody of embezzling, that's a different topic as an example, right?
Yeah.
Or receiving bribes or just something that's just patently illegal, right? But maybe we're using this to create the layoff list, right?
Yes, and I think that's always
Bob,
the fear, right?
yeah.
Yeah, once you start getting this data together, maybe for one thing, it's also easy to look at it in another way. So I talked to a analyst at Gartner who talks to a lot of employers, and he shared that this was pre-pandemic. The employer wanted to promote people, and the way to do that was checking key card entries, like who was longest at their desk or in the office. It's already kind of problematic, right? Because we all know I can sit at my desk for 10 hours, but not actually be successful at my job, right? Like, I don't know if that's a good indicator of performance, but they use that.
Some people
When it
work at
comes
home and seem to do okay. I don't know.
Yeah, and it's just like it doesn't, like it's not about checking the hours that you work. We usually suggest that you check the results, right? Because somebody can sit there for 10 hours, do nothing. But the problem here was when then it came to, the pandemic, the company had to do layoffs. They wanted to look at that data because they felt like, well, we know who are the most productive employees and the unproductive employees, the ones with the longer absentee times, which of course, we know from the pandemic now that people have families, they have caregiving obligations. There's nothing to do if they are committed and productive employee often. And that data wouldn't actually kind of take that into consideration, right? So this becomes really problematic really quickly. And we also see at work like flight risk measurements that purport to predict who's going to leave in the next year, and looks at some sort of signals on that. Like, are you updating your LinkedIn very often? Do you move data around on, do you put USB sticks in your computer? Do you print a lot? And that's usually based on behavior of past employees. So we don't actually know exactly.
Or just a hypothesis.
Yes. And, it's really just a prediction, right? And it's not often actually accurate that people leave within a year. And the question is like, what does an employer then do with that information, right? Like maybe they're not so thrilled about you and they just feel like, okay, the person maybe leave and that's good. But, if an HR manager knows that, are they going to give you a raise and other people won't get a raise just because there is an indication that you might leave? We don't even know if this is true, right? It's just a prediction. Or maybe if there's leadership training, they're not going to put you forward because you may be leaving the company, right? Like, once you have that information, it's incredibly difficult to not make decisions based on it, right? Like even when I did some of these tests of these tools that I did, even though I knew sometimes, okay, there's literally no sign in facial expression analysis, but when you see that number, it just feels like objective math, and it's just really hard to ignore that. And I think that's actually hard for companies too, because they see, oh, this person was flagged for being at flight risk, and but we don't actually know if that means anything.
Right.
But I think it's hard for HR managers not to, or hiring managers, who, or people in charge of managers, to just ignore that information.
Based on any discussions you've had with policymakers or other people that might influence policy, do you think a day is coming when companies will basically be forced to provide more transparency into what they're doing in terms of data collection on employees?
Yeah, I mean, we hope so. I think there should be a little bit more transparency. I think we see a little bit of that in the European Union, right? They have a new AI Act that's sort of in the works. And hiring is actually, and AI at work is actually classified as a high risk or high stakes endeavor, which sort of triggers a bunch of safeguards that you have to keep as a company or as an organization when you use that. And I think that's actually really smart. We haven't really seen that in the US a ton, but maybe my hope is sometimes you have this. Is, maybe in some states in the United States, for example, in California, you have a very high regulatory burden for car emissions. So not every company is going to then build 50 cars for different states, right? They will build one car that will pass the higher emission rates in California and use it on sell it in all other 50 states, 49 states, I guess. And so we hope maybe this will happen with some of this regulation, right? If one state or one city makes it harder and requires some of these regulations, the off-the-shelf tools will follow this one regulation, and then also we may have a little bit more insights in other jurisdictions. But we don't know this, and there isn't a whole lot of appetite in the US to generally regulate, but we see a little bit with Biden pushing into this. We see the National Labor Relations Board has come out saying, that sort of broad surveillance of workers could be really problematic because workers in the United States have the right to organize and form a union, or at least like have organizing communication, and those could be really swept up in some of this broad surveillance. So we see like ideas how to regulate it. Have we seen any actual regulation? No. But I think there's more and more at least people see the problem, right? And that's what I sort of felt with the book. It's like I wanted to show how AI is already being used in the good ways and the bad ways, and just to show, because a lot of people don't know that. So now we can act, right? And now we can build regulation based on that is actually specific to how we use these tools, because I think the problem is like, broad regulation when I don't understand AI is actually not really helpful. Um, you know, so we kind of have to know like how is it being used and where does it go awry? What do we know? And then we can like, build guardrails towards that, and not just like a broad, big regulation. Um, so, that's my take on it.
Last little topic, and then we'll start to put a bow on this. As a worker, this is very broad. Should I be freaked out that AI is going to take my job?
I mean, look, the AI that is mostly used for monitoring and surveillance is not going to take your job, because it's like predictive AI, right? That looks at signals and compute, analyzes signals inside the company. So I think we see a little bit that maybe AI is going to be kind of your manager or your boss, in a way, checking like, do you send enough emails compared to other workers, right? Like there are people who are very successful, do X, we can check their behavior. So maybe the AI will remind you, hey, you should like send as many emails as that person. Have you talked to Tracy recently? She's really successful, right? Like we can see like some sort of nudges and reports. And then there's generative AI, which I think is going to will have a profound impact on a lot of our jobs, and will take a little bit of the mundane, everyday sort of stuff that we all hate to do away from us. And my hope is that jobs will then evolve, right? I get to do like more of the creative stuff that AI is not going to be able to do. So my hope is that like our jobs will be better. I'm sure some of the jobs, kind of like elevator attendants who had to push the knobs and all of that, maybe 80 or 100 years ago, they went by the wayside. But hopefully they found all other new jobs, and hopefully that will help us as well. But that is like ways out. That is not tomorrow. Um,
And you talked about 8 out of 10 a couple of times at the biggest companies or whatever.
yes.
You know, I don't know what the right scale is, but one is like not even paying attention. 10 is this is fully deployed. Where do you think we are kind of on a AI intelligence, AI utilization scale right now?
I think we see that companies starting to, I think it's, you know, deployed in hiring a lot, because I think it's a pretty easy use case, right? Like you have a lot of people that are apply. You need a technological solution. You don't want humans to necessarily read the resumes because they have all this unconscious bias. So it feels like, okay, this is a good use case. I'm not saying it actually is, but I think that
It's
we
a good
see a
use
lot of
case. It's not a
AI.
good deployment of it, but it's a good use case.
Yes. The deployment we have to work on, what tools we actually build and use here. But we see a pretty high penetration there for the surveillance. Like I wish I had better numbers, but we don't know, and we don't know because companies don't have to tell their employees most of the time, and case law has been in their favor. Like whatever happens on a work computer in the United States is usually, there's no expectation of privacy, and this belongs to their employer, and they can do whatever they want. Sometimes, and I think this is another forced consumerism sort of point. Like, I remember when I started my first job, maybe the first day when you like log into whatever their Google Mail or whatever infrastructure, maybe there's a little note, we might monitor the space, and you have to consent to that. First of all, you may forget about it. Maybe you've never read it. Also, you're going to say no and like walk off the job on the
Exactly.
first day, and you may forget about it, right? So, like, some folks are very diligent and they use a second computer at all times. They never use the computer issued by their employer to do any, send even personal emails. They don't want to run their personal emails on that computer because it can all be sucked in. We don't know exactly the limits. And there's some people who feel very strongly that they don't want any apps from their employer on their phone because they could swipe up, vacuum in other data. And we don't know the limits. But I think what we see sometimes, we see some companies now pushing into sort of wellness and healthcare. There's one that I looked at that, it seems very benign and wants to personalize benefits. But when I listened to the demo and they were like, oh, here's Aiden, this is a synthetic example, but they were like, Aiden, we see from his benefits that he dropped his spouse from his medical plan. So we think, the computer will infer that this person is now going through divorce and suggest therapists to them. Here are some therapists in your network. You should call them. And, seems very benevolent, and maybe it will help Aiden, who knows? But I also feel like for a lot of employees, it's like, wait a second, like why does a third party company have access to this like very personal benefits data, and can make inferences on that and knows all of that? So I think we will see more and more of that, and there is no law for transparency here, so it will come by like maybe journalists like me looking at what these companies do, who they're working with, and maybe there's some individual people who are very smart who can track this kind of stuff because they have a computer science background. But we don't know a whole lot of stuff. I mean, I think what's actually kind of helpful, I watched a whole lot of webinars of software companies that sort of make these videos for people who maybe buy these tools on the market for companies, and they're very IT heavy and sort of very jargony and technical. So nobody ever watches them. I watch them, not all, but a lot of them, and so I like learn. They talk very openly about the capabilities of these tools, that they can find any kind of signals, and can that the signals then lead to a report that maybe goes to IT, that maybe goes to HR, and starts in investigation. So we know it's often built in by very large tech companies in these tools. Do I know which company turns them on? I don't. So if people have tips on that, I would love to know more and talk about this more, because I think we will see this more and more.
Well, one last thing, because it was in the news, or I saw it today, I'll say anyway, and today's February the 21st, was a deep fake. So, right, Sora is out now, right, or about to
Yeah.
be out.
Oh, yeah. You can
And
build images of anything in videos. Yes.
yeah. And so it was somebody in the finance department of apparently not a small company, where the deep fake was executives at this company, uh, via video. It
Hmm.
sounded like it was interactive,
Yeah.
directing the person to wire $25 million to some bank account.
Yeah.
And it
Yeah.
looked like the executives, sounded like the executives, even mimicked their office backgrounds.
Hmm.
Like, it was very believable, apparently. And this person actually executed the trade, or did the wire.
Yeah.
$25
Yeah.
million
I know. I
worth
know.
of
And we've seen this
fake.
before with like audio deepfakes, right? That like, somebody got a call from what sounded like the CEO, because, that often the audio is out there, and you can train a tool, and now you can do that with video. So that, the question sort of the authenticity of factual content, right? But I think it's also speaks to like what I've done. And this was like a couple of years ago. I tricked some of these one-way video interviews by actually, I wasn't on screen. I was sitting next to the screen, and I was typing in my questions, and I had an early deep fake say the words that I was typing. So I wasn't actually speaking. And I got results. Like none of the companies actually, none of the vendors that deployed these tools had any kind of security protocol, right? Like we see this in facial recognition technology. At least you have to move or something to indicate that you're a moving and breathing human. You can't just hold in a photo to open a door most of the time. So we see there's a whole lack of security processes on any kinds of ways that work. So I think, the FBI put out a notice like 6 months or a year ago saying like, hey, employers really need to be aware of this. Like there's like candidate swapping in interviews, but also like, it could be a real hacking problem for companies, because, if you employ somebody remote, they had somebody else, or they used to deep fake to do their employment videos. They may get access to the computer systems on day one. So it's not only about like somebody lied and it's the wrong employee who shows up, and maybe they don't, they're not as good as a coder as you thought they would be, but actually like you might give them access to very sensitive data, and they start vacuuming out. So there's a whole lot of new world there that we haven't fully figured out, either as employers or employees, and job seekers. Um,
Yeah, it's weird, Hilke, because I mean, it sounds like science fiction, right? I mean, it sounds like you're watching a
Yeah,
movie,
I know.
where the title is, 2205. You're like, well, yeah, that's a long time from now. It's like, no, this is kind of happening like right now. And it seems so bizarre. Well, that can't be real. And
Yeah.
it's
No, it is
very
happening. And,
real.
it feels sometimes like very Orwellian and dark, but the reality is like a lot of these tools are not very good. But the problem is they still make decisions. And in this case, they also make flawed decisions. So that is gets even more problematic, right? We don't know a lot about these tools. In science fiction, it's usually like these tools are always right. And they sort of create this like over the top surveillance. Yes, you may be surveyed, but like who knows if the sentiment analysis is any good? But the problem is if those kinds of analyses are then used for
That's right.
employee decision, this can be really difficult, right? It could lead, it could be signals, and we've seen this from surveys that company leaders do want to use some results from AI tools with many other decision making in layoff decisions, right? If you have no data, or if you have one data point that is maybe a flawed productivity algorithm, you may want, some companies may want to use that
Well, in
because
fact, they would even call it a
yeah,
data-driven decision, right?
yeah.
It's like, well, yeah, but no. So, Hilke, this is a fascinating topic. I could keep you on this call for another 2 hours, easy. Is there anything that we didn't talk about quickly before I let you go?
No, I think I think we've covered a whole lot, and I want to, sort of encourage people to understand like the world that we live in, so we can act on it. And now is the time to act and maybe push back a little bit and demand that like there is some guardrails, right? That this is more transparent, that there is explainable AI. Like we know some of these things that we know. Is can be used for high stakes decision making. Maybe there should be an appeals process, kind of like we have with like our credit score, right? Like I have the right to check once a year what my credit score is. I sort of roughly know what are the criteria why my score is this, and I can appeal it and say like, hey, actually, this is the wrong Hilke. Like that's not
Right.
me. I'm sure that is full of flaws, that system, but there is a system. For some of this hiring stuff, we don't know enough. We don't actually have a right to know, and we absolutely cannot push back, except when it comes to like your background screening in a social media background screening, if it's part of a official background screening process. But if a company monitors your social media after employment and maybe you said yes to that, or I don't even know if they have to get consent, because some of the stuff that you post on social media is technically public.
Public.
It's not private data, right? They're not taking your Facebook password and looking at that, but whatever you post on X and LinkedIn, that's usually publicly available. So, but do these tools, I mean, I've examined these tools that try to find personality traits out of your social media, and I can authoritatively say they do not work because I tested them on me and others, and we built a larger sample at NYU with a computer scientist and a sociologist to test more people on this, and they do not work. And I think that's kind of hard to know that some companies use these tools.
So let's end with this. I want to encourage people to get Hilke's book, The Algorithm. We're going to put a link when in the post production for how to go buy the book. Also to follow you on LinkedIn because you write about this and post on this pretty frequently.
Yes, yes. And
Right.
LinkedIn is a perfect way to talk about this, right? Like there's so many job seekers, HR managers, people who like care about the world of work
Exactly.
congregate there. So it's like, I've sort of abandoned Twitter more or less, and, as many journalists have for obvious reasons. But I also feel like, well, this conversation about the future of our work needs to happen on LinkedIn. So I encourage people to get in touch with me to share maybe their experiences, or, if they have any comments, feedback, if they think I missed, big things, I do want to know about that.
So what I love about the book is, I mean, you're driving awareness. You're starting to kind of pull the shroud back a little bit. That it's not like
Yeah.
this unfathomable thing, that only somebody in Mountain View understands. So I think it's great because you lay it out in a way that real people can understand. You're an Emmy
Yeah.
Award-winning investigative journalist, so it's not just one person's rant on "I hate AI" or "AI's wicked" or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, in fact, I started it because I think AI is a transformative technology,
Amen.
and I wanted to understand it. And, and I think also like, that is maybe like a good thing of journalism. I already found people who have been affected by these technologies in profound ways. So I think like, talking to real people and understanding what is happening to them has like really been eye-opening to me, to pull out some of like maybe like the science behind it, which I think we should talk about it, but like in ingestible levels, and also understanding here's how it affects people. It's not just like AI philosophy or theoretical examples. No, like there's hundreds of people or millions of people who are looking for jobs, and they have to apply to hundreds of jobs. And I think, I think when in doubt, and you have like done some of the things that leading folks in the space recommend to, AI make your resume machine readable, yada yada yada. It's not you. Like we know from the data that it often takes hundreds, sometimes thousands of applications to find a job. It's not you. It's probably that tool in the middle between employers and employees that who knows what it's acting on, but it's like at one point it's just a numbers game.
Okay,
So
I
it's like,
so
don't give up.
appreciate I no, I so appreciate that last point because that's really kind of getting into my why on Career Club is the emotional and psychological toll that
Oh
job
yeah.
search takes and how much people internalize it must be me, I must be the problem. And thank you for saying it's probably not you actually.
Yeah.
It's the process, it's the system isn't efficient at all and therefore it drives all this inefficiency that comes through as rejection
Yeah.
and it's not really you, it's just a messed up system that hopefully to your point because we want to be optimistic and hopeful that technology can ultimately be a solve for this. But right now what we see in a book like yours does such a great job of illuminating we're not all the way to bright yet, that's for sure. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think we rush to sort of digitize processes that are actually not really working when
exactly.
humans do them either. So let's actually change this all. Like what are like ways to hire that are not built on old processes that we just digitize or use AI for, but like how can we actually improve this whole system? So I think there's a lot to be done, and it doesn't always have to be AI tools. In fact, some of the more traditional tools like regression analysis that uses just a few variables versus everything that's on a resume, they're often actually as predictive, and you don't have the stuff coming on like first names or locations or hobbies that
Baseball.
your school that like yes that like says more about your background, right, your socioeconomic status, and your background, that actually if you're qualified for the job. And I think I know that like HR folks and everyone, they don't want to use that either. They want
Right.
tools that actually find people based on merit, on their skills, on their experience, like and not on their background and who our parents are or where we come from. Like so I think we all have to push into the space and make it better.
Awesome. Well, you're doing a very big piece of making it better. So thank you for that. And thank you for taking a few minutes today. Everybody, thank you all so
My
much
pleasure.
for listening today. Again, please go by The Algorithm by Hilke Schellmann. Follow her on LinkedIn, comment as she said. And also, again, please check out the resources that we have for both employers and for job seekers. We're here to help you and by bringing you high quality content with award-winning people like Hilke. So thank you again so much. Hope everybody has a great day and I'll see you soon. Hilke, thank you.